NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte's recent claim that Rome allowed 500 U.S. military aircraft to take off from American bases in Italy during U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran has sparked a political backlash in Italy. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni dismissed Rutte's remarks about Italy's role in the U.S.-Iran conflict while appearing alongside French President Emmanuel Macron at a Franco-Italian summit in Antibes. The NATO chief had claimed that country after country, ally after ally after ally, have made their bases available for Epic Fury. 500 U.S. planes took off from U.S. bases in Italy to support Epic Fury. However, Meloni strongly dismissed the claim, saying Italy had not authorized any U.S. request to use Italian military bases for kinetic attacks against Iran. She added that the misunderstanding had already been addressed with the Iranian government.
Noi non abbiamo partecipato al conflitto in Iran, del resto se avessimo partecipato al conflitto in Iran, mi perdoni, ma non si spiegherebbe, diciamo, questa delusione che viene reiterata da parte del presidente americano, come lei sa, molto spesso. Noi abbiamo rispettato i nostri impegni, chiaramente, cedendo le basi per attività che non erano cinetiche, ma che erano di natura logistica e tecnica, e quando si è prospettato, e lo sapete anche questo perché è stato ampiamente scritto, quando si sono prospettate delle richieste che esulavano da quel perimetro, noi non abbiamo.
Meloni criticized Rutte for giving what she described as a muddled account after he said Italy had provided massive support to U.S.-Israeli operations against Iran. Meloni said Rutte's remarks wrongly implied that flights departing from Italy were directly involved in attacks on Iran.
Quindi il governo ha fatto esclusivamente quello che ha dichiarato in Parlamento, come del resto lo stesso Mark Rutte ha confermato anche ieri dallo studio ovale. Il segretario generale, nella sua, diciamo così, entusiastica ricostruzione, ha messo insieme cose che in realtà sono diverse tra loro, confondendo la tipologia dei voli autorizzati, e lui stesso poi ha corretto e puntualizzato. Ministro Tajani ha parlato oggi con il suo omologo iraniano e anche da parte iraniana mi pare che si sia compreso che c'è stata da questo punto di vista un'incomprensione.
Meloni's comments followed reports that U.S. President Donald Trump had expressed frustration over Italy's refusal to allow U.S. bombers to operate from Italian bases during the conflict. She reiterated that Italy only permitted logistical and technical operations under existing bilateral agreements, and said she did not know why Rutte had given what she described as an oversimplified account. NATO spokesperson Alison Hart later clarified that Rutte's comments referred to logistical and technical support. She said Rutte had highlighted how allies, including Italy, fulfilled existing bilateral agreements covering military basing and overflights.
Europe being a platform of power protection for the United States. Look at Epic Fury. Between 4,000 and 5,000 flights taking off from European bases in support of Epic Fury, the war against Iran.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte met U.S. President Donald Trump on June 24th, praising the U.S. leader while subtly pushing back against his latest criticism of the alliance. Trump told NATO chief Mark Rutte he was let down by members of the transatlantic alliance who did not back his war against Iran.
I think if anybody else were in that position, we wouldn't even be meeting today, to be honest with you, because we were let down. We didn't need help on this at all. We've demolished them in literally the first week. But it would have been nice if they would have said, we'd like to help.
Rutte pushed back gently, saying, I know there have been isolated cases about which you are really disappointed, but generally speaking, your European allies have been there with you.
Yeah, but let me say one thing, which is, I know your thing, but let me, and I know about the, let's say, your irritation about that. But when you look at the numbers, 4,000 to 5,000 US planes taking off from bases in Europe. In the 6 weeks this war took place, still the ceasefire took place mid-April. Bucharest, the airport in Romania, having to close. It had to close for commercial traffic because they had to make sure that you were able to send a tanker aircraft up in the air. So this is what I know. There have been isolated cases about which you are really disappointed. But generally speaking, your European allies have been there with you. I really want to make the point. 4,000 to 5,000 US planes taking off from European air bases. So that's about Iran.
On June 25th, speaking at the Atlantic Council front page conversation, Rutte reiterated that European allies had assisted the United States during the conflict with Iran.
When you look at the whole picture of Europe, all these European nations living up to their bilateral agreements with the United States when it comes to the use of bases and other support for the United States, this number of between 4,000 and 5,000 US planes taking off from European bases in support of Epic Fury. I mean, this was crucial and important for the US to be able to conduct that whole operation.
Iran accused NATO of being complicit in what it described as the US-Israeli war against Iran after Rutte publicly highlighted European support for US military operations. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei condemned Rutte's remarks. Baghaei further accused NATO of committing a flagrant violation of peremptory norms of international law and the core principles of the UN Charter. Meanwhile, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio confirmed that Italy took no part in any military action against Iran and never authorized the use of its bases for such operations.